Moving on, China. This is something you've been right about all along, and you've been a little on one side compared to the rest of the world, but China, you say, is fading. The economy is shrinking relative to the rest of the world. The gap between the US and China economies was narrowing, as you can see from the graph, but now started widening as China fades. So the gap, China's fading, and the gap between China and the US economy is widening, and China always wants to overtake the US, but
but this is the graph that Chinese policymakers, I'm told, really look at.
Right.
But I know some of the Western academics like to look at purchasing power parity and not at what the nominal dollar exchange rate is. But the Chinese policymakers look at this. They want to be the world's largest economy. They have that ambition. And here, that they were on track of that. They had almost closed the gap with the US. Just a 30% gap was left in 2021. But last couple of years, especially last year, the Chinese economy has been slipping. And you have the US economy, which has been relatively resilient, so the gap is opening. So, and even in the global share, if you see, and I'd written about this late last year, that China is slipping, US is sort of doing well, and there are some of the other countries, India, Indonesia, Poland, Mexico, these are the countries that are
gaining from it. But one of the key things that's a big shocker, which you forecast and highlighted, is that to a large extent, China's growth was also helped by a lot of foreign investment, FDI. And now you're saying capital is fleeing China. Net FDI flows are negative for the first time, negative. If you look at that graph, they're dropping into the negative territory, minus almost $10 billion. That is a huge turnaround for China.
Yeah, because during the boom period in China, over the last couple of decades, there were some quarters where the Chinese economy attracted FDI of $100 billion a quarter.
My God.
In a particular quarter. Now remember, like in India's case, we get 50 billion or so in an entire year. China was getting $100 billion a quarter. But how sentiment has shifted, that for the first time in recorded history, since this FDI data began for China, in the last quarter that we have data for, there was negative
that is a huge
an outflow
change.
of 11 billion from China. So that just tells you about how capital is getting reallocated and which countries are benefiting. It's not as if the capital is all just going back home.
Just
these are some of the
coming
countries.
to that, we just wanted to the extent that if you had 100 billion coming in a quarter, not every quarter, but that's bound to have affected your growth rate and make you hit 12% GDP growth. So if we want to go, India wants to go to 12%, we got to get 400 billion in FDI inflow.
Yeah, if you look at the East Asian countries, during the peak of their boom, they were getting FDI flows of 3 to 4% of GDP.
Wow.
Our numbers have improved, but we're still closer to 1%.
1% instead of 3 to 4.
Exactly, 3 to 4.
So
that's
we need
the
4
average.
times. That's a very good statistic.